Good morning, dear listener, or good evening, wherever you are. Settle in. This is not just a story. It's a warm cup of something familiar. It's a voice in the quiet. It's a hand gently reaching out through the fog of silence to say, you are not alone. The story begins in a modest little town nestled between soft hills and winding roads. It's the kind of place where everyone waves, even if they don't know your name. And in a small white house at the end of Maplewood Lane lived Mr. Walter Granger, 76 years old, retired postman, widower of 10 years, and, by his own quiet admission, lonely. Loneliness in old age, Walter often thought, was a different kind of ache. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't slam doors or shout through the walls. No, it whispered. It crept in slowly, like the chill that settles when the sun slips behind the trees. After his wife passed and his only daughter moved 3 states away, the silence in his house became thicker than the wallpaper. Mornings used to begin with laughter in the kitchen. Now they started with the slow whir of the coffee pot and the sigh of a chair pulled out for one. Walter would read the newspaper, not for the news, really, but because the rustling pages reminded him of conversation. One afternoon, while watching birds peck at the feeder outside his window, he thought, this can't be it. I still have stories left to tell, and ears to listen to, surely. And that single thought, just that tiny flicker of maybe, was the beginning of everything. Over the next chapters, you'll hear not only Walter's story but also the voices of others who found themselves navigating the quiet corridors of later life. They came from all walks of life. A retired schoolteacher who found joy in forgotten hobbies, a widowed nurse who built a new family through volunteering, and a quiet man who stumbled into purpose through a simple act of kindness at the grocery store. Their stories don't promise a magic solution, but they do offer something just as powerful, hope. And so begins our journey. Stay with me. The next morning, Walter stood by the window, staring out at the same 2 squirrels chasing each other across the fence. The feeder was empty again, they'd been busy. With a sigh, he shuffled to the kitchen, poured his coffee, and stared at the folded newspaper like it might talk back. But it didn't. He thought about calling his daughter, but it was a weekday, and she was always so busy. Maybe later. Instead, he found himself opening a drawer filled with odds and ends. Old coupons. Batteries with uncertain life left in them. And then, a faded library card. It was almost a joke. He hadn't stepped foot in the town library in nearly 15 years. Still, something tugged at him. Maybe it was the card, maybe it was the memory of reading out loud to his wife back when they were younger, or maybe it was just the feeling that he needed to be somewhere else. So that afternoon, Walter took a walk. The library was only 6 blocks away, and the familiar creak of its wooden front doors met him like an old friend. Inside, it smelled exactly as he remembered, paper, coffee, and time. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. She was probably in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair tied up in a bun. "Can I help you find something?" Walter hesitated. I'm not really sure." "That's the best kind of visit," she said warmly. "Just looking can lead to wonderful surprises." He wandered through the shelves, unsure of what he was searching for, until he found a little corner in the back of the library. One soft chair. One small lamp. A stack of community flyers pinned to a board nearby. That's when he saw it. A notice, printed in cheerful letters. Silver Saturdays, a book club for seniors. Come read, share, laugh, and connect. Every Saturday at 10 a.m. He tore off a tab with the contact number and slipped it into his coat pocket. He didn't go home right away. Instead, he sat in the little chair and read a chapter of a book he hadn't touched in over a decade. It felt like opening a window. That night, he didn't just stare out into the yard. He picked up the phone. Not to call his daughter, not yet, but to call the number on that flyer. A voice answered, warm, familiar, full of light. "Hello, You've reached Mary with Silver Saturdays. Can I help you? Walter cleared his throat. Yes. I think you already have. Walter didn't sleep much that night. Not because he was troubled, no. This time, it was the gentle flutter of anticipation. Like a quiet engine humming after being still for too long. He laid in bed and watched the ceiling fan spin, thinking about the voice on the phone. Mary had sounded so easy to talk to. She told him, "Don't worry if you haven't read the book, just bring yourself. That's enough." And so, Saturday morning came. Walter ironed a clean shirt, the pale blue one his wife used to say made his eyes look kind, and even gave his shoes a quick polish. He left the house earlier than needed and walked to the library slowly, as if not wanting to miss a single breath of the cool morning air. When he arrived, he paused just outside the doors. His heart beat a little faster than usual. It was strange how something as simple as joining a group could make a grown man feel like a schoolboy on the first day of class. But he went in. In the back reading room of the library, a circle of chairs had been set up. Not all were full, but enough to make the room feel warm. There was soft laughter in the air, a plate of store-bought cookies on the table, and books open in people's laps. "Walter," someone called. It was Mary, the woman from the phone. She had a spark in her eyes and wore a scarf with tiny golden birds on it. "I'm so glad you came." He gave a modest smile. "I almost didn't." "I know," she said, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "But you did. That's what matters." The group that day talked about a novel set in a small Italian village. One man, Jerome, a retired dentist, joked that it made him hungry just reading the food descriptions. A woman named Dottie shared how the story reminded her of her honeymoon 50 years ago. Walter didn't speak much. But he listened. Really listened. And every time someone laughed, he felt a little more like he belonged. At the end of the meeting, Mary handed out next month's book and said, "Come early next time. We're thinking of grabbing coffee after." Walter took the book, smiled, and said, "I think I'd like that." That night, he did call his daughter. Just to say hello. She was surprised, pleasantly, and they spoke for nearly 20 minutes. He told her about Silver Saturdays, and for the first time in a long while, she heard something different in his voice. Hope. The following week, Walter found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, checking the clock in anticipation. Saturday mornings now had a new meaning. No longer just a quiet stretch of time filled with coffee and crossword puzzles. Now they meant something more. They meant people. Conversations. Laughter. And a growing sense that he was, once again, part of something. That morning, he arrived early to the library, just as Mary had suggested. The air was brisk but carried the first hints of spring. Daffodils had begun poking through the frost-hardened soil near the sidewalk, and robins chirped from the telephone wires above. Walter paused to take it in. He hadn't noticed the world's little details in quite some time. Inside the library, Mary was setting out chairs. "Right on time," she said with a grin. Walter smiled. "Didn't want to miss my seat." "You've got a reserved one now," she said, pointing to a chair with a sticky note that read, "Walter's spot." The note was silly, but it made his chest warm. It had been years since anyone had saved a seat for him. As others began to arrive, Walter found himself chatting more freely. He asked Jerome about his garden, which apparently was home to tomatoes the size of softballs. Dottie shared an old photo from her wedding, which had everyone oohing and aahing, even the librarian stopped by to peek. The book this week wasn't quite as exciting, a slower-paced mystery, but no one seemed to mind. The discussion wove in and out of the novel's plot and wandered comfortably into stories from their own lives. That was the real joy of the group. The book was just the excuse. The heart of it was connection. Afterward, a few members made good on their coffee plans. They walked together to a small cafe 2 blocks down, where the barista already knew Mary's order by heart. Walter was hesitant at first. Coffee shops weren't exactly his scene. Too loud, too modern. But this one surprised him. There were soft chairs, a fireplace crackling in the corner, and a shelf of board games stacked near the window. He ordered a black coffee and took a seat near the others. It wasn't long before Mary pulled him into a conversation about music. Walter mentioned how he used to play the harmonica as a boy. You? A musician? Mary teased playfully. I wouldn't go that far, he chuckled, but I could play a decent version of, "Oh, Susanna." My wife used to roll her eyes, but she'd hum along anyway. They all laughed. It wasn't loud or forced. It was the kind of laughter that comes from comfort, from being seen. As the weeks passed, Walter became a regular not just at the book club, but at the cafe too. He started bringing little things, an article he clipped from the paper, a batch of cookies he'd baked, even an old photograph of him and his wife on their wedding day. The group welcomed it all with open hearts. One afternoon, as the group chatted over muffins and coffee, a woman named Helen, new to the club, hesitated before speaking. I hope it's okay to share something a little personal, she said, clutching her tea with both hands. Everyone leaned in a little. I've been widowed for just over 2 years now, she said softly. And I thought I was handling it just fine. But the truth is, I've never felt more alone. There was a pause, but not an uncomfortable one. Walter looked at her gently. You're not alone, he said. You're here now. With us. Helen gave a small nod, and the smallest of smiles. Mary reached over and touched her hand. In that moment, something shifted for Walter. He realized that this group, this little collection of people who'd all wandered into each other's lives, wasn't just helping him. It was helping each other. Every person around that table had known loss. Had felt forgotten. Had stared at their walls wondering if anyone would ever knock again. And yet here they were. Laughing. Listening. Living. Later that week, Walter walked past a community bulletin board near the grocery store and saw a flyer advertising a senior tech night at the rec center. Normally, he would have ignored it. But something made him stop. He tore off a tab and called the number when he got home. The woman who answered explained it was a free class to help seniors learn basic tech, email, video calls, even social media if they wanted. I'd like to try it, Walter said. My daughter keeps telling me I need to get online. Maybe it's time I listened. That following Thursday, Walter joined a group of about a dozen other seniors in a room filled with laptops and smiling volunteers. At first, the screen looked like a foreign language. But by the end of the night, Walter had not only learned how to send an email, he'd sent one to his daughter. She replied instantly, thrilled. More than that, Walter saw something that night that surprised him, other seniors just like him, fumbling their way through modern life, laughing at their own mistakes, celebrating their small wins. A man named Carl had successfully started a video call with his grandson in Texas. Another woman named Betty posted her first photo on social media, a selfie with her cat. The room erupted with applause. And in the middle of it all, Walter realized, connection wasn't just about face-to-face meetings. It could also live in messages, emails, photos, and video calls. The world had changed, but there was still room in it for him. As he walked home under the glow of street lamps, Walter thought about that first day by the bird feeder, when all he saw was silence. Now, there was so much more. He had a book club. He had new friends. He had coffee plans. He had a seat at the table. And slowly but surely, he was building a new kind of life. Not one without loneliness. But one where loneliness didn't get the final say. Spring arrived slowly, one bloom at a time, painting Walter's little town in soft colors. The trees on Maplewood Lane began to shake off their winter slumber, and the park near the old post office filled once again with the sounds of children and dogs and kites fluttering in the wind. Walter noticed it all, not just with his eyes, but with his heart. Each Saturday morning now felt like a small celebration. Book club had become more than a gathering. It was a thread that connected him to something larger. To people. To purpose. To the rhythm of living. And as it often happens, when someone begins to heal, they start to notice who else might need help too. One afternoon, after picking up a new novel from the library, Walter stopped by the diner for lunch. It wasn't his usual routine, but the thought of sitting in his quiet kitchen didn't appeal to him that day. The bell above the door jingled, and the waitress, Carla, gave him a wave. "Back again, Mr. Granger," she said with a wink. Walter chuckled. Trying to branch out a little. He slid into a booth by the window, ordered a turkey sandwich, and began reading the first chapter of the new book club pick. Halfway through his sandwich, he noticed an older man seated 2 booths away, alone, stirring his soup slowly but not eating. His face was lined with deep furrows, and his eyes seemed to be staring at something far beyond the table in front of him. Walter recognized him. Mr. Thomas, he thought. He'd seen him at the grocery store a few times, always alone, always quiet. Something tugged at Walter. He debated for a moment, then stood up and walked over. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty seat across the booth. Mr. Thomas looked up, startled at first, then nodded slowly. "Sure," he said, his voice a little rough. Walter slid into the seat and offered a warm smile. "I'm Walter. I've seen you around town a bit." "Harold," the man said, nodding in return. "Been here almost 40 years. They chatted for a bit, about the town, the weather, the soup. Nothing deep, just the kind of talk that fills the silence like sunshine on cold skin. After a few minutes, Walter mentioned the book club. "It's nothing fancy," he said. "Just a bunch of us at the library on Saturdays. We talk about books, but mostly we talk about life." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like something my wife would have liked. She was always reading." Walter gave a small smile. "You'd be welcome too. Even if you don't read the book. We just enjoy each other's company." They finished lunch together, and as Walter got up to leave, he wrote down the details of the next meeting on a napkin and slid it across the table. Harold took it without a word, but he tucked it carefully into his coat pocket. The following Saturday, Walter kept glancing at the door during book club. The room was lively, filled with the usual chatter and the scent of library books and cinnamon from Mary's muffins. Just as he was about to give up hope, the door creaked open. Harold stepped inside. He didn't say much that first session, just listened and chuckled now and then at Jerome's jokes. But he stayed. And afterward, he came with them to the cafe. The following week, he brought his own book suggestion and shared a story about how he met his wife at a book fair in 1965. And just like that, another person was pulled from the quiet. Walter began to notice more opportunities. At church the next Sunday, he saw Mrs. Langston sitting alone in the back pew. She had lost her husband last year and hadn't been herself since. After the service, Walter sat beside her and told her about the tech class at the rec center. He even offered to walk with her there if she was nervous. She smiled for the first time in weeks and said, "I might just take you up on that." A ripple effect had begun. Walter didn't set out to become a connector, but in learning to overcome his own loneliness, he was helping others face theirs. At the cafe, Mary noticed too. One day, she leaned over and said, "You've got a gift, Walter." He looked surprised. "Me? You make people feel like they belong," she said. "That matters more than you know." He thought about that later as he sat on his porch, watching the birds flutter around the feeder again. They didn't seem quite so alone anymore, those birds. And neither did he. That night, Walter sent an email to his daughter. You were right. I've been thinking about what you said. About how life's not over just because things are different. You were right. I've joined a book club, made new friends, and even learned how to send an email without panicking. Just wanted you to know I'm doing okay. And I miss you. Love. Dad. The reply came within the hour. This made me cry, Dad. In the best way. I'm so proud of you. Let's plan a video call this week. I want to see your face. Love you so much. Ellie. Walter stared at the screen for a long moment, then smiled. That night, he didn't sit by the window in silence. He went to bed early, with a full heart and plans for the days ahead. Loneliness hadn't disappeared. But it had been softened by community, brightened by connection, and, most of all, changed by choice. Walter had chosen to open the door. And now, he was holding it open for others. It had been nearly 3 months since Walter first dusted off his old library card, and life, in its own gentle way, had started to feel different. Not loud or fast or glamorous, just full. The kind of full that made getting out of bed feel like a promise instead of a chore. And now, something unexpected was on the horizon. Mary, ever the glue of their Silver Saturdays book club, had whispered to Walter after one meeting, "You know whose birthday is coming up next week?" He shrugged. "I don't think I do." She grinned. "Yours." Walter blinked. "How on earth did you?" "Jerome told me. Said it was about time we had cake at one of these meetings." "I don't want a fuss," Walter said quickly, already feeling his ears grow warm. Mary waved him off. "Too late. There's going to be a fuss. A nice one." Walter hadn't celebrated his birthday properly in years. Sure, his daughter Ellie would send a card, maybe a phone call if she wasn't too swamped with work. But since his wife passed, the day had become just another page on the calendar, a quiet footnote, noticed and then quickly turned. This year was different. The following Saturday, when Walter walked into the library's reading room, he paused in the doorway. The lights were a little brighter than usual. A small banner made of construction paper letters hung over the bookshelf, "Happy Birthday Walter." There were balloons, not too many, just enough to make the space cheerful, and a chocolate cake sitting proudly in the center of the table. Jerome stood nearby holding a harmonica. Walter laughed. "What is that for?" "Well," Jerome said, puffing his chest, "you said you used to play one. Figured it was about time we heard you prove it." Walter shook his head, chuckling. "You folks are something else." The group gathered around, singing a slightly off-key but enthusiastic rendition of Happy Birthday. Mary had even found an old photograph of Walter as a young man from a local yearbook archive and printed it out on a card. "You were quite the looker," she teased. Walter pretended to groan, but his heart swelled. He hadn't felt this surrounded, this seen, in a long time. After the cake was cut, Helen stood up to make a little toast. She was usually quiet, but today her voice rang clear. "Walter, when I first came to this group, I was feeling lost. I didn't expect anything more than a few hours of distraction. But you," she paused, emotion catching her throat for a moment, "you've made people feel welcome again. You've reminded us all that we're not invisible. Thank you." Walter blinked a few times, pressing his lips together, then simply nodded. Words didn't feel quite big enough. Later, while the group broke into smaller conversations, Walter sat beside Mary near the bookshelves. "You know," he said quietly, "I wasn't ready for this." "For cake?" she teased. "No. For people again." Mary nodded knowingly. "Sometimes we don't know what we need until it walks into the room and sits beside us." Walter looked around at the laughter, the books, the empty plates. "I think I forgot how much I missed this. Just, belonging somewhere." "You never stopped belonging, Walter," she said. You just needed the right room to walk into. That evening, Walter returned home with a leftover slice of cake, a card full of scribbled notes and good wishes, and a single yellow balloon tied to his wrist like a quiet reminder, "You matter." As he opened the front door, he nearly tripped over a small box sitting on the welcome mat. It had a shipping label from his daughter. Inside was a tablet, one of those sleek, modern devices he would have never bought for himself. Taped to the front was a note in her handwriting. "Happy birthday, Dad. This one's for our video calls. No excuses now. I miss your face." Walter chuckled, shook his head, and plugged it in. Later that night, Ellie helped him set it up over the phone, walking him step by step through video chat. When her face finally popped up on the screen, glowing and bright from her apartment in Chicago, he smiled like a man who'd found the sun after a long winter. "Look at you," she said, beaming. "You're practically a tech wizard now." He grinned. "Don't go getting ahead of yourself." They talked for nearly an hour. She asked about the party, about the book club, about Mary. Walter answered every question, his voice carrying something new, lightness, maybe. Or just the sound of someone no longer alone. That night, Walter didn't fall asleep watching television. He turned off the lights, slid under the covers, and let the day replay in his mind, the laughter, the music, the candle on the cake. He'd started the year feeling like the world had grown too quiet to bear. Now, the silence had been filled. Not erased, just softened by companionship, warmed by care. And the most surprising part? It wasn't just that he had changed. It was how many lives were changing with him. One Tuesday morning, as Walter sat trimming his hedges, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. It was a silver sedan he hadn't seen in years. The door opened, and there she was. Ellie. His daughter stepped out, holding a travel bag in one hand and a bouquet of sunflowers in the other. "Thought I'd surprise you," she said, smiling through happy tears. Walter couldn't speak. He just hugged her, long and tight, like trying to press back the years that had stretched between visits. Inside, she marveled at the photos on the fridge, some new, some decades old, and the library books stacked by the couch. "Is this your place?" she teased. "You've got more social engagements than I do." Walter chuckled. "Don't act so surprised." They spent the afternoon walking through town, visiting the library where Mary greeted Ellie like an old friend. At the cafe, Jerome gave a dramatic bow and declared, "So this is the famous daughter." Later, sitting on the porch with tea in hand, Ellie looked at her father and said, "You're different." He nodded slowly. "I'm still me. Just a little more awake now." Not all moments in the book club were filled with cake and laughter. One Saturday, Dottie arrived with red eyes and a small envelope clutched tightly in her hand. "I've made a decision," she said, voice steady. "I'm moving." A hush fell. She explained she would be relocating to Arizona to live near her son and grandchildren. "I love it here," she said. "But I've realized I don't want to grow old alone if I don't have to." There were tears, happy and sad, and a group photo taken that day with everyone holding their books like trophies. Walter gave her a hug and said, "You're not running away from loneliness, Dottie. You're walking toward joy." Dottie nodded, smiling bravely. "And I'll carry you all with me." Her chair stayed empty for weeks, but never forgotten. One rainy afternoon, Walter and Mary met at the cafe, both arriving soaked but smiling. As they dried off, Mary pulled out a folder filled with notes and sketches. "I've been thinking," she said. "What if we made Silver Saturdays bigger?" Walter raised an eyebrow. "How much bigger?" She slid the folder to him. Inside were plans for a monthly newsletter, guest speakers, and even partnerships with the local high school, pairing seniors with students for storytelling afternoons. "They learn from us," Mary said, "and we remember that we still matter." Walter grinned. I think you're onto something. With help from the library and local businesses, they launched the Silver Circle Initiative, a community-wide program that used books as bridges between generations. Soon, the reading room was fuller than ever. Grandparents sat beside teenagers, sharing laughter, lessons, and lives. Loneliness didn't stand a chance. A year later, Walter stood before a crowd at the town spring fair, holding a microphone with slightly trembling hands. Around him were banners celebrating Silver Circle, students handing out storybooks, and seniors in lawn chairs sipping lemonade. He cleared his throat. I was once a man who thought the best parts of his life were behind him, he began. I thought silence was the final chapter. But I was wrong. He spoke of silver Saturdays, the faces in the crowd, the voices that reminded him he still had purpose. Loneliness doesn't always shout, he said. Sometimes, it just whispers, you don't matter anymore. But here's the truth, you do. You always have. Applause followed. Ellie clapped loudest, tears in her eyes. That night, back at home, Walter sat by the window again. The bird feeder swayed in the breeze. His tea steamed gently on the side table. But the silence? It no longer felt empty. It felt earned. Peaceful. Shared. Because now, he had stories to tell. And he knew someone would always be listening.